Welcome to the Five-Week Linguist Show. If you want to learn a language or you teach a language, you've come to the right place. Join Janina each week for tips, resources, and advice for making engaging language learning happen anytime, anywhere.
Welcome to the Five-Week Linguist Show. We've been talking about the ACTFL 5 C's, right? The 5 standards for learning languages. So communication, right? Talking to people, comparisons, communities, culture. And this week we're going to talk about connections. I'm going to read you the definition right from them. So connection. So one of the goals here, this goal is connecting with other disciplines and acquire information in diverse perspectives in order to use the language to function in academic and career-related situations. So making connections, learners build, reinforce, and expand their knowledge of other disciplines while using the language to develop critical thinking and to solve problems creatively. And acquiring information in diverse perspectives. Learners access and evaluate information in diverse perspectives that are available through the language and its cultures. So very simply put, it's oftentimes using other content areas, other ideas to learn languages, right? So one thing I've talked about a lot is my experience as a language immersion teacher, right? Teaching math in a language, right? So students learn content and language at the same time. And there's lots of programs like that. But you can recreate this experience for yourself. And so in languages, we often teach in the United States under some global themes, right? There's 6 global themes, and I won't go into all of them, but at the end of the day, they're really sort of everyday things. So science and technology, beauty and aesthetics, for example, or daily life. So under daily life, some of the different themes that we might talk about or learn to talk about in a new language would be families or education. And that would look different at every level. If you were an absolute beginner, talking about your family might be simply naming how different people are related to you. And at that next level, it might be going into a lot more detail about each of those people and maybe the history of your family at sort of the, with much more detail. And then at the next level, that might look at an advanced level, really being able to compare family structures throughout history, right? What's the history of the family? And what does this look like in different parts of the world? How is family different in different cultures, right? So connecting, that would be a connection to history, for example. Another example, so for beauty and aesthetics, one of the other themes that we talked about, you might, on a very basic level, be able to describe what something looks like. At the intermediate level, you might study architecture in your target language, right? Which is going to be connected to history. You're going to learn about different time periods, and you're going to learn that at the same time while you're learning your target language. And at the advanced level, you might narrate on the history of ideals of beauty, right? Again, that's a connection to history. So this is a really rich way to really build your skills at all levels. And I want to start with science. We'll talk about science. One of the things that you can do to really build your skills is to pick something that interests you and start really learning about it in the new language. So we'll just talk about science. And I think it's really interesting, everything that's going on in the world right now, the coronavirus, and that's happened in the past couple of years with regard to that. think about all the lessons that we can learn from other cultures, right? And all that we can learn about language and science at the same time, about reading about these things, reading, think about if you're learning Italian, for example, really going back to those newspaper articles and reading. Go to ReadLang and get suggestions, type in coronavirus in Italian and see what comes up. And interestingly, we've learned this example. I mean, obviously it's dictated our lives for so long. It's had such an impact on the world in so many different ways. But I think it's a really interesting example as well because of the wealth of information that you'd find about it. So at a very basic level in learning languages, just being able to learn some basic words and phrases to talk about the coronavirus and about yourself and how this has affected you, right? This is an example of those connections making between those disciplines. And then really building your skills through input, through learning and reading about this and reading articles. Pick one article from every month in the past year or the past 18 months or the past 2 years, whatever. And look at the comparisons. Look at what they're learning so quickly to now, developing a vaccine in less than a year. So all the science that goes into that. So that would be one example of how to use connections to learn languages. Some areas are much easier to, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of geography, there's naturally a lot of math in languages, lots of numbers, even though that's at a really basic level, you're always doing that. When you're learning language, you're learning about culture, and you want to really dig into those materials, those authentic materials to learn about the target language culture and language at the same time. Some other ways to really apply this is target language textbooks. I've bought a few primary school language textbooks because I think they give great insight into what people are learning in other countries. It'll give you a great deal of content area. And if you're an adult, one of the things I think is great is, sort of a math book with word problems for primary school students. I bought that years ago in Spain when I was a student, before I think the internet was even really a thing or much of a thing. And it's been really valuable. It was really valuable. I learned so much about, making those connections across disciplines. For example, understanding mathematics. So understanding that in a lot of Latin languages, we use a comma and a period in a different way than we do in English. So it can be really easy to confuse a decimal and a comma, right? The word 1,000 to 1.0, the equivalent of 1.0. And that's an example of learning about other disciplines, right? To the point where you almost forget about the language. The language is really interesting, but you get into what you're doing. Documentaries are a great way to do this. I'll say them again. Yabla. I love Yabla because they take a lot of documentaries and they make them accessible. Language learning with Netflix is another way to really practice these connections among discipline to really build your language skills. And you'll learn so much more along the way about anything that interests you. So next week, we're going to get into another one of the standards. If you have any ideas, if you have some resources that you use to either with your students for making connections among different disciplines or on your own, could you please share them in the comments? I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the 5-Week Linguist Show with Janina Klimas. Join us each week here. And visit us at reallifelanguage.com/reallifelanguageblog for more resources for learning and teaching languages.